म्हणजे त्यापासून कॅमेरा हॅलो तुमच्याकडे बट माझा आवाज आला हॅलो हां थोडंसं इम्प्रूव्ह यूट्यूब लिंक आहे हां ते कसं ते आता ते कॅन्टीनचं पण चहा पण नको वाटायला लागलं.
ते करेक्ट.
नाही खरंच नकोच वाटायला.
तिथंच बसतो त्या ठिकाणी बसतो. काय असेल तर तिथं त्या
मग तुम्हाला लागतात वगैरे
माईक पण
ओके. Hello, sir. Hello.
Okay, hello. Hello. Game news today. Sir, audible. Good evening. Good afternoon. Good night.
Hello, sir. Hello. Hello.
सरांना आवाज जात नाही ना सरांना नाही तुम्ही नाही जात
Hello.
just message me. Text message का करतो.
Hello. No, no, not really. Am I audible? You check. Am I audible enough?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Okay. Now you are audible. I think you have to get closer to the microphone.
Yes. Okay. So it's clear. No problem. ಇದು अच्छा इयरफोन यूज చేయమా hello
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
will be using no earphone
Do I need to?
not
Do I need to?
necessary not
I think
necessary
if this is audible enough, I will not use a earphone.
yeah very clear it is clear okay I'll get back
Yeah, sure.
yeah Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. A very good afternoon to you all. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. The theme of the webinar today is Microbial Humanities, a post-pandemic perspective. It is really difficult to see a potential silver lining from the devastating pandemic that has been creating havoc all around. From health to global economy, everything has been affected. However, it's not only about the negative side of it. The biggest upside of this pandemic is the tangible improvement in the environment. People have learned to appreciate the values of family and friends. Relationships have definitely improved. We have learned to understand our strengths and potentials and also focus on our areas of concern. We have learned that savings are needed to curb disasters. Our health care attitude has improved. We have also learned to appreciate the great outdoors. And of course, online resources are optimized. Institutions have begun online teaching and learning, and the greatest advantage of this is remote learning, comfort, and accessibility. We have begun to invest in online learning. Now, as academicians and teachers, we have been making the optimum use of this lockdown. We have not let this pandemic bog us down or dampen our spirits. A number of institutions have come up with webinars, online FDPs, training programs, etc. All this keeping in view the upgradation of ourselves and to add more to our knowledge and intellectual coffers. As a part of this, our college, that is A.R. Burla Mahila Mahavidyalaya, the Department of English, in association with the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, have come up with this national webinar on microbial humanities, a post-pandemic perspective. For today's webinar, we have with us Dr. Dinesh Kumar Nair as our resource person. Dr. Dinesh Kumar is Associate Professor, Department of English, V.G. Vajay College, Mulund, Mumbai. Dr. Dinesh Kumar is Research Supervisor, Academician, Curriculum Designer, Writer, and Corporate Trainer. He has to his credit 28 years of UG, PG, and research level teaching. He completed his doctorate from Mumbai University, and the title of his research work was Motherhood as a Mode of Survival in Contemporary African American Fiction. Sir has also supervised 23 MPhil and 5 PhD dissertations. He has published 8 books and 24 research papers. He also designs curriculum and has designed the same for 4 universities and 5 autonomous institutions. He has published a number of books, which include the latest one is the World War First Centenary Hintsets, Linguistic and Stylistic Analysis of Texts, and Literary Theory. In addition to this, he has published a number of research papers on various topics which include eco-criticism, media memory, neo-diasporas, and many other things. Basically, his areas of research is spread far and wide. He is an expert in critical race theory, eco-criticism, Mexican fiction, ecofeminism, culinary cultural politics, cultural citizenships, geopolitics, textual democracy, neo-diasporas, to name a few. He has delivered a number of talks and keynote lectures at various seminars and conferences. He is well known all over India and even probably globally for his sense of humor and intellectual insights. And during this pandemic, he has also delivered a number of lectures through webinars, a few of which include the pandemic, toxic discourse and healing culture, on eco-criticism, and online teaching for an offline curriculum, and on digital idealism and the subaltern learning. In addition to this, he has also conducted a short-term course that is Emerging Trends in Literature and Language Studies at HRM University, Sikkim, and he has also organized a NACS-sponsored national seminar and completed the RUSA's Train the Trainer program. Sir is also actively involved in mentoring and training corporate employees. This is, a very brief introduction of our resource person today. Over to you, Dr. Dinesh Kumar, sir. And I'm sure we all will be greatly benefited by your intellectual discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Annie John. Very good, a very warm good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, let me express my gratitude to principal of A.R. Burla Women's College, Solapur, and the convener of this webinar, Professor Dr. Annie John, the IQSC coordinator, Dr. S.N. Bosley, the co-convener of the webinar, Dr. P.R. Wagmare, and all the teaching and non-teaching members of the college, plus all the enthusiastic participants who have already registered and they are there on various platforms attending this webinar and then will be taking part in the subsequent dialogue that will be triggered by some of the ideas generated in this talk. Let me first share my PPT and then it will take just a couple of minutes. Online sessions invariably gives me jitters because I always tell myself that I'm a digital immigrant and I'm not a digital native like most of you, particularly the people of the younger generation. So this, according to is my screen visible? You can guide me. One of you can unmute and tell me if the screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Thank you so much. Yeah, because as I told you that I get jitters when I'm in front of a screen. Because as my friend, a very close friend of mine, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, tells that this is a tipping point in our career or tipping point in a webinar, because we rely so much on the PPT and if it doesn't work for some reason, we are in trouble. Tipping point is a very interesting idea that a very small change can have a drastic effect on something else, like a difference in 1 degree temperature in the context of global warming can make a lot of difference. And I add to that by saying that it's not just a tipping point. For me, it is also very often a tripping point, which I try to avoid. And then more than the preparation for the session, the preparation for the gadget or the device is an imperative for me. Well, I have titled my session, this session as Microbial Humanities, a post-pandemic perspective. And rather deliberately, I put the word post within 2 brackets. I'll try and explain what the title implicates. The key words in the title are microbial, humanities, and pandemic, of course. And microbial, the word microbial indicates anything that is related to or characteristic of microorganisms. Humanities is a term that is used in academics very frequently. It stands for all academic disciplines that study various aspects of human society and culture. So, what I imply here is there is a need and there is a possibility and great opportunity to bring some of the perspectives and tools of humanities in understanding microbial science and this pandemic by extension. So, humanities also stands for, if you go back in time and go to the era of Renaissance, at that moment in history, humanities was contrasted with the divinity. So you could get the range, you could really get that in terms of its binary. Humanities also includes various subjects such as history, art, literature, philosophy, theology, and anthropology. I'll be evoking some of these disciplines during the course of my discussion. Now, it is almost impossible at this point of time, or I have been feeling so for the last 4 or 5 months, wondering whether I'm the only person who is so very seriously affected by the pandemic. If not in terms of the infection, but then there isn't anything that I think about which is not touched upon by the pandemic, because I'm constantly reminded. The more I think about the pandemic, the more I wonder about this lesser known world of the microbes, the concept of human precarity and how perils have been redefined in the context of microbes more than ever. Because even as we are talking about this, the yesterday's statistics tell us that nearly 85,500 new cases have been reported of COVID-19, and with nearly 1,100 people dying. And the latest casualty today has been, it is directly related to culture, the culture industry. We know that one of the great singers of the South, S.P. Balasubramanian, is no more. We've also heard in the last couple of days, that is even more alarming for me. Couple of days we have heard about the cases of double infection. So that is, it's a matter of in a matter of about 3 months, 90 days or so, some health workers who have been infected once have got the second bout of this infection. So it's called, technically it is called double infection. It is reinfection. So even when we are talking about different versions of unlocking, the number of cases are on the rise, though the mortality rate may not be so high. So I personally believe that in the face of this precarity, in the face of this peril, unprecedented peril, the cultural script is what we find normally on television, what we find on news industry, at times on in literature and in writing. The cultural script that we play about this pandemic seems to border onto alarmism. There is a term called alarmism. Alarmism is an exaggerated misrepresentation. So on one hand, we talk about this alarmism. On the other hand, this cultural script is also extremely confusing. I'll come to that confusion that COVID-19 has created just a little later. That's the confusion is mainly because the script, this cultural script, has changed so very frequently. If you go back in time, the script that we had at the somewhere towards the end of the March is not the script that we currently have. The script has changed so very frequently, indicating a massive confusion in our approach to pandemic, at least culturally, because the whole culture industry, I believe, the industry of publication, industry of performing art, film, and other parts of culture industries have been have been very seriously affected by the pandemic. And I have put the word post deliberately within the brackets. And I have a specific parenthetical semiotics in that. And what is latent in that semiotics is the politics of brackets, I would say. Now, what I imply here is that I'm amplifying the doubt, I'm amplifying the uncertainty, and I'm amplifying the indeterminacy of the word post, whether it is a marker of time, temporal marker, or whether it is a matter of condition. Like postmodern condition, we are in pandemic condition. So, at what point do we really start speaking about the end of the pandemic? We have had plenty of discussions about the post-pandemic economy, post-pandemic education, and so on, without really getting into this post-pandemic situation. So for me, this post-pandemic is still a myth, because we are living, increasingly we are reminded that we are surrounded by a number of zoonoses. Zoonoses are those diseases which are rather triggered, or rather wherein animals are very agential. We have been witnessing in the last 10 to 15 years a number of microbial episodes. And also we can say largely that human culture, human development, and the entire history of human development has been caught in many microbial contingencies. Now, in this context, what I also would like to do is, I must start with a disclaimer that I may not be so much into literature, but then definitely I'll be touching upon various aspects of culture. And this session is not an analytical session as I'm generally used to. For me, I would say this is pretty much a term setting exercise, pretty much I would say an agenda setting exercise, because this very idea of microbial humanities is relatively new. Probably the first time that we are talking about this, because we have heard at various phases, we have heard about many other humanities. For example, environmental humanities, we have heard about digital humanities, and these are disciplines which are now well established. And the tools and the methods of these disciplines are also well established. But I am involved in my own way, in a very humble way, to possibly look at the agenda of a new discipline, a new interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary exercise, which has been made very significant, or which has been made inevitable in the current pandemic situation. So this is the kind of space clearing that I have to do before I start with. And I begin with two visuals, because I've been very fascinated of late with a lot of paintings that have been happening. And I have seen that paintings have reflected the pandemic more immediately and more quickly than many other art forms. And that is the reason why I have started with these two paintings. These paintings are not images, they are designs. There is something called pattern paintings, along with so many other types of paintings. And there is a particular genre of painting called bioglyphs. Now, bioglyphs are basically designs or motifs, M-O-T-I-F, motifs, which are normally seen in fossils. Naturally, they are cut into rocks because of the fossils. So bioglyphs are basically an imitation of those designs, and particularly at the Montana State University in the US, they specialize at the School of Art in this university. There are two great painters, young, vibrant painters. One is Sarah Mast and Robert Royle. These two paintings are very similar, and they come from the same school of painting. What they intend to do, they have been doing it for a long time. What they do is they apply art to science, or rather, they take the medium of art to propagate the ideas of science. So, in the process, they have also used a number of microbial designs. So, these two are the paintings which reflect what is called the bioluminescent bacteria. Bioluminescent are the light producing bacteria. Some of these designs, which have been observed through the eye of the microscope, have been rendered in the form of painting. They look pretty much like photographs, but then they are not photographs, but they are paintings of these light emitting bacteria. So something to begin with, that how art has taken up microbes as a genre, as a part of the genre making, is what I want to begin with. And I would also like to have your attention on two more paintings that have come up recently. One is, in fact, it's a series of paintings by Suzanne Joelson, and of the title The Secret Agents. And another one is by Lacey Walker, again both American painters, artists. Joelson is a painter based in New York, and she is famous for her lyrical and decorative, very highly lyrical and decorative abstract paintings. They're all abstract if you look at them, abstract paintings. And what she does is she mobilizes certain microscopic designs and microbial patterns. If you look at the painting on the left, they are like the RNA structure of the microbes. And she went on to hold an exhibition in 2003 with a set of what she would name as the microbe paintings, which became very, very popular. Lacey Walker, on the other hand, is a painter and a crafts teacher, and she has a blog, and she is also associated with a craft training program called the Rebel Unicorn Crafts. Unicorn Crafts. And she also uses microbes as designs in her renderings. If you see that the painting on the right, some of these designs are very similar to the structures of those microbes. So my point here is that the painting, more than any other art form, have taken up the microbial information and the microbial structures and patterns to make certain abstract designs. So that is my prefatory discussion. And then I would come into the main part of the discussion with some amount that we need to spend on understanding the human microbes interface. What do we mean by microbes? Microbes are all those microorganisms. The word organism in a way implies life. Certain smaller entities with lives, with their own life. They include bacteria, viruses, prions, fungi, certain protozoa, and certain multicellular parasites. They are microbes because they are not visible to naked eyes, and they are visible very often only through certain very powerful microscopes. Microbes are pretty much in our environment. We cannot think about an environment without microbes. And even if we look at many of the scientific theories of evolution and also creation of life, it is said that microbes were there before any other life form. So they have an antiquity, they have a legacy to speak about, apart from their impact on human life. They're in our environment, they live on us, and they also live in our bodies. On us, in the sense there are many microbes on human skin, as much there are many microbes inside our bodies. Particularly, think about the gut bacteria, the intestines, and the kind of microbes that we have. It is said that over 500 different species of bacteria reside in normal large intestine. 500 different species. And it is also said there is also some kind of a disparity when it comes to the amount of microbes that we carry, comprising nearly of 5 pounds of the total body weight. It's almost about 2.5 kilos of our body weight is made of the microbes, though they are not seen. In low-income countries, this is more, and in the high-income countries, definitely the weight of the microbes that we carry is definitely less. Maybe because of certain factors like more hygienic food, and then the proper food intake and the nutritional value. And in many countries, including those of Africa, the number of gut bacteria is always seen very high. And then human microbe interface also has created a particular culture, has also created a particular cultural reaction of people, because disease is as much a physical biological situation as much it is also a cultural situation, because certain diseases come with a tag and certain diseases come with stigma also. Now look at the whole idea of a contagion and how people treat the people who are infected, and especially infected with contagious diseases. So there is always a fear and stigma that have had a major impact on the experience of disease. The other day, one of my students who was quarantined somewhere in North was telling me that life in a quarantine center is miserable because the way the patients are treated vary from place to place. And even after nearly 6 months of battling with the virus, some of our cultural and social attitudes towards COVID-19 has not changed. So our experience of the disease by itself is not always so much of a discomfort, but the way we are treated when we are infected very often will decide that. So COVID-19, like many other contagions, has really made a difference in the way we understand our identity and our situation when we are infected. And that determines even the accessibility of care. Accessibility of care includes treatment. We have had health workers breaking down on on television. If you see some of the interviews, like some of them have lost hope because they are the frontline battlers when they are in the frontline battle when it comes to um, the, a contagion. So these are certain cultural notions. Now the agenda that I want to set, agenda that I was talking about as a part of agenda setting in um, microbial humanities will include these major points. One, to examine the microbial presence in humanities and culture, to see whether humanities, particularly history, literature, anthropology, and so, whether they have been informed or whether they reflect the presence of microbes. I would definitely say yes. And secondly, the microbial presence in our culture, whether we have certain culturally friendly microbes, and we will examine some of them, and then we will come to know. The second point is that to examine the cultural representations of microbes, whether literature, film, and various other writings, and cultural expressions, including painting that we have seen, whether they have been representing the microbes well or whether they have been involved in misrepresentation. And then there is also very important human element in human society is about ethics. Like we talk about the erosion of ethics, particularly in research, and this is so very important in the context of what is called our research to find vaccines. I'll come to that just a little later. Then the third point is to understand anthropology as a human microbes co-evolution, and to see whether human evolution has been supported, catalyzed, or impeded by microbes or not. Maybe right from Darwin, we have understood that we have not evolved alone. We have evolved in the presence and also with the help of many microbes. For example, the very change from hunter-gatherer existence to agricultural enterprise was a very massive change even in human gut bacteria, because till that time the kind of food that the human beings were having and the kind of food that they started having from setting up agricultural enterprise would indicate that there was a considerable microbial shift, and hence there was a human microbe co-evolution happened at that point of time. This is a point in anthropology. And another point is to study the significance of language and literature in a microbially microbially active terrain. We are, and we have always been, of course, and increasingly so now, that we are in a microbially active terrain. It is said that, and we don't have exact data. Somewhere people say that anything between 8 trillion to 60 trillion could be the number of microbes that we have on the planet. So it is anyway microbially active, and time and again, like we are exposed to many of these microbial episodes. Like an earthquake, we have this microbial episode. We had Zika, we had Nipah, we had SARS, and so on. So they all could be considered as microbial episodes. And how does literature and language how do they function? How do they help in lessening and buffering the impact of a microbial episode, and or do they really exaggerate that? And also, of course, it could be extended to films as well. Then comes another interesting point in agenda, that the literature, whether it is cultural expression, any cultural expression, one of the interesting questions is about identity. The very strong identity politics that we bring into almost all discourses on literature. Do we get to know our own self? Do we get to understand our own identity? And also whatever we express, not necessarily all the time in art, but also in day-to-day life, microbially. Whether my expressions are conditioned by microbes, whether my self and identity. I'll come to those very interesting points also just a little later. And then comes another point in agenda, that is to explore certain microbially informed theoretical and interdisciplinary research models, because microbes have forced certain minds, certain writers to take the help of art, because there are many science writers. So what I intend to do in the process is also talk extensively about one genre called science writing, like sports writing and food writing. It has been there in the fringes, but then now it has emerged in a very big way. Science writing doesn't mean fictional writing. It's not science fiction that I talk about. I'm talking about long form writing. I'm talking about non-fiction, wherein science is made easy for common people. So there is also what is called this microbially informed theoretical and interdisciplinary research models that we can explore, largely in the context of what I would call as science writing. Okay. Now, what do I mean by microbial humanities? You may not find this term in Google, and because I must say that it is my humble coinage. We do not have a term yet in circulation. So what do I mean by microbial humanities? It is rather a discipline in the making. It is, as I told you, it's still at the stage of agenda setting. It is a discipline of biocultural origin. Now, what is this bioculture all about? Bioculture is bound by a number of disciplines. Bioculture is bound by medical sciences, social sciences, landscape ecology, biotechnology, and the humanities. All of them coming together, converging on a point called bioculture. It is also a term very often used to implicate the use of living things and living organisms in culture. To give a simple example, the use of animals in sports. There are many sports involving animals, equestrian events, or even bullfighting and so on. You might have heard about the very famous, or rather very notorious controversy about Jellikattu in Tamil Nadu, all about animal rights versus human entertainment. So bioculture is also about the involvement or the use of animals in many cultural enterprises, human cultural enterprises. Then we also need to look at microbial humanities like the way we look at digital humanities and environmental humanities. I wouldn't get into those definitions and those tenets because they are well established by now. My point of comparison is that like these two disciplines, microbial humanities is also largely interdisciplinary because, as I already mentioned, it mobilizes many approaches. And it can also be considered as an outcome of what I have been speaking for a while now, through a number of sessions. This is probably my 8th session on what I would call as my contribution to pandemic discourse, and which has come out of this awareness of this pandemic turn that many of our academic enterprises have taken. Pandemic turn is pretty much like, if I can avoid the cliche of turn, is more about the kind of departure that many human disciplines have taken, like in economics, like in humanities, life sciences, and all being informed by the perils of the pandemic and also the microbial presence. So I would believe that, like the spatial turn, like the gender turn, that humanity and the humanities and the human epistemologies, many of these epistemologies are going to take a turn, and they've already started taking this pandemic turn. And it is also, as I've already mentioned, that it's a discipline that will bring together the interests of arts and sciences, a kind of convergence which is very close to my heart, because I was, for a very long time, I was a science student and then migrated to arts. So I always keep wondering, apart from science fiction, do we have any other any other vector where we can bring these two things, these two disciplines together? And also microbial humanities will, among other things, will redefine certain approaches for us, as like realism and so on, by bringing more microscopic realities into depiction, into narratives also. And also, by its very nature, it will touch upon history, anthropology, arts. By arts, I mean all art forms: visual, performing, literary arts, and all forms of arts. Language and ethics, because language too has been modified by the pandemic, and pandemic has been interpreted by the language resources also. So it's a very interesting situation whether, if I don't have a word for the microbe, or if I don't have a word for the virus, do I really perceive the virus? So this is a very interesting situation of language and reality. And then, of course, the ethics of research, all of them to be reassessed and re-examined in the context of the microbes. Let's also examine at this given point the relationship between what is called the human microbiome and research. We need to understand that the term, first thing is that we need to understand the term microbiome. And microbiome describes the sum total of genomes of all the microorganisms. And what is then human microbiome? Human microbiome is the entire total of the microbiota living in and on human body and in all biofluids, including blood and all other biofluids. So this is also a very enormous number and variety that you can think about. It is, in fact, the study of human microbiome is a very, very important, very interesting site of cross, multi, and transdisciplinary studies. And there is a very interesting study that is happening, particularly in the wake of this COVID-19 situation, in two of the great universities in the UK, Oxford and Nottingham universities, largely headed by very young researchers who are not necessarily scientists. Their interests vary from history, anthropology, environmental activism, and so on. And two of them I'll talk about at length here would be, one is Beth Greenhow, Beth Greenhow and Cressida Jervis Reed, along with Jamie Lorimer, working in two great universities of the UK. they have come out with certain very interesting, very fascinating possibilities. And particularly, Greenhow talks about a human geography wherein she has studied the social implications of all innovations that have happened in health and biomedicine, and thereby trying to explain how human beings and animals, along with microbes, become very important resources for biomedical research. According to her, these three elements are very, very interesting and resourceful elements in biomedical research. And she has also authored a couple of very interesting books that I would say can be as the germinal source of this study itself, microbial humanities. One is Bodies Across Borders, very interesting book, and Trading the Genome. These are two very interesting theoretical accounts that one can refer to. And Cressida Reed is essentially a historian. She specializes on the history of science, medicine, and technology. She again specializes on what is called the vector-borne diseases. Vectors are those agents of contagion, like mosquitoes are the vectors for malaria. So she has brought out some very interesting insights about that. So these three have collaborated in some work, and they have come out with certain very interesting ideas that they have been spelled out, and I'm evoking their perspective here. What they indicate here is that microbes often determine how social and biological lives intersect. Now we need to think about COVID-19 as both a social as well as a biological situation. I've already spelled out some of the implications, the social and cultural implications of being uh, infected. So they talk about that. They say that microbes often determine both the social, not just biological lives, but also social life. And they further implicate that the study of the microbiome that incorporate the concerns and capabilities of the social sciences and the humanities together with those of the natural sciences. It is possible to use microbiome as a pivot or as a denominator to consider all these aspects, social sciences along with natural sciences. Three aspects can be combined: social sciences, humanities, and natural sciences. And further, they indicate that microbes have tremendous impact on the notion of self and identity. I'll come to this point just a little later by evoking another very interesting thinker. Um, what they eventually unpack in their study is this very complexity, and I would say this heterogeneity of human microbiome relationship. Um, it's very complex because thinking that some of the microbiomes are friendly are necessary, and some of them are potentially dangerous, like the COVID-19 virus. So that is how complex this relation is. And let's also try to find a link, build a bridge between human microbiome and humanities. What is then this microbiome? As I mentioned, the collective genome of all microorganisms that live on and inside the human organism. And we have had an estimate in terms of the weight that they have. It's almost about anything ranging from 2.5 to 5 pounds of our body weight is made of these. So the term microbiome can also mean the collective of microbes, the collective of microbes in a given ecosystem. So as and when we move from one ecosystem to another, the microbial environment will also change. Let's look at this very, very interesting biopsychological situation. It is even I have wondered very often, because it is very frequently we feel that when we are not in a good mood, it would be a very interesting situation to see why are we in a bad shape or in a bad mood. I've always seen that gastrointestinal health has some direct impact on human mood, like many other changes in the body. And so this is one very interesting point of connection between gastrointestinal health and human mood. For years together, people have they continue to believe that the intestinal ulcers and stomach ulcers are caused mainly by stress. They are not caused only by stress. They are also caused by the colonies of many bacteria, colonies of many microbes, and any slight imbalance can really create this uh, can create this bad gastrointestinal health. And another very interesting equation here is the use of cosmetics in the context of skin microbiome. I told you there are thousands of microbiomes on even on skin, and some of these cosmetics and some of these perfumes and some of these chemicals have the potential to react with those. So when we test the efficacy of cosmetics, do we take into consider these microbiomes also? So the study in cosmetology is partly in this direction as well. And then comes this, having spoken about so much of role of the biomes, let's also be a little cautious about that. There is a term which has come in circulation called microbiomania. Microbiomania is popularized by a very interesting microbiologist called, of the name, Jonathan Eisen. He cautions all our interest by saying that there is also a possibility of overselling human microbiome studies, especially in the context of genome projects and so on. So he talks about the hype. He cautions about the hype in human genome project, and there is also a danger of exaggerating, he says, gothifying and exaggerating all our bodily bugs. And he says that even when our internal flora is a reality, exaggerating that will take us to another extreme, which is equally detrimental. So I'm just opening up the discussion with placing these the possibilities on the debate also. I'm opening up the debate also. And then microbiome geographies and anthropologies are also interesting. How places differ, not just in terms of the climate, the weather conditions and topography. Places also differ in terms of the microbiome presence. And of course, the anthropologies. For example, historically, we have been with various microbiomes, and we have changed, and the microbiomes have also changed. So when we revisit we revisit anthropology, there is one possibility of studying it in the context of microbiomes. And then human microbiome would also lead us to some of very, very pertinent issues about ethical, legal, and social concerns about of microbes and of being infected. And also this very interesting term that has come up in circulation again is biobanking. Biobanking is is a very complex process by which samples of bodily fluids or tissues are collected for research use. It happens, as I told you, in many efficacy testing, and it involves a lot of ethical questions also. So this is biobanking is very often done to understand health and disease better. So, but then it is not independent of some of the legal and ethical issues as well. And if you extend eco-criticism, it can very easily include what I am talking about, microbial humanities. I would rather say that it it intersects. If it intersects, it intersects with eco-criticism, and particularly with the recent turn that eco-criticism has taken. I have seen many of these eco-critics, including Lawrence Buell and Scott Slovic, taking up this notion of microbial eco-criticism, and they have marked in their writing this decided paradigm shift from very basic eco-criticism to what is called microbial eco-criticism. There are many microbial ecologists who believe that microbes too have to be preserved, that maybe because of the human intervention, that many microbes might be wiped out from the face of the planet. So here it implies the need to develop the collaborations between social scientists and human microbial ecologists. That is one point of intersection, which is possible well within eco-criticism itself. And therein, that agenda setting exercise can continue so as to revise the agenda of eco-criticism and also to revise the agenda of social sciences. And then this is also an exercise that will lead to the understanding of the connectedness. This idea of connectedness, I think the central principle that we have in eco-criticism is about connectedness. Like what Barry Commoner says, that everything is connected to everything else. I would extend that and tweak it to a point to say that everything is connected to microbes also in this study. And it is in this context that I can evoke the study of Stacy Alaimo, and the study Bodily Natures, which is considered to be a seminal work in what is called material eco-criticism. By the term material, what she implies is not just the dead matter. She says that material can be matter and also organic material. And she talks about this idea of transcorporeality, that is understanding the bodily identity, the physical identity beyond the body itself, because it is connected to many microbes inside and also connected to many microbes which live outside the body. And also, very interesting point, that whether when we are infected, what is our status? Are we just a normal individual, or do we also become a host of a disease or the microbes and then pass on to others? So this is a very, very interesting debate that she opens up. And Alaimo is incidentally professor of English and the director of sustainability studies at the University of Texas. And her interests include eco-criticism, animal studies, and so on. And she emphasizes very, very clearly in this work, and I believe that this book marks this golden handshake or wonderful handshake between eco-criticism and microbial studies. And she says that human body has a point of reference beyond itself and in relation to other lives within and beyond. That is a very, 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 very significant understanding. And we also then, when we employ this approach, we also get to study and examine the narratives of bodily engagements with resilient microorganisms. So for example, a disease narrative, when you talk about disease and recovery in fiction, or maybe in a sci-fi science fiction, about diseases and combating those diseases, we have these narratives of bodily engagements with these resilient microorganisms. And that opens up, according to Alaimo, very, very interesting vector in study. Let's also then look at this big microbiome template that we can mobilize in a variety of studies in humanities and social sciences. This is as reflected once again in the in the words of another wonderful theorist, Stefan Helmrich, a cultural anthropologist. He also talks about this microbiome mania, and this exaggeration that is very often possible in the study of human microbe relations. And then subsequently, this template that we are talking about is also a template of intersection of human microbiome and environmental governance. So we cannot talk about eco-criticism or environmental activism without talking about human intervention with microbiome. And there are also microbiome imaginaries, like national imaginaries, racial imaginaries that you talk about. There can be microbiome imaginaries. Certainly the reference is to literature and narratives. And there are microbiome narratives which are possible, or which have been made and which have been created now. And microbiome knowledge also intersects with identity and citizenship, because as I have told that when we understand that we are invariably our mood, our behavior, our psychology, our social status, and our mobility, if they are conditioned largely by many microbial episodes, we need to accept that even our identity is to some extent is linked to this, and also our citizenship. And the whole idea of the whole scenario that unfolded in the initial phase of COVID-19, of particularly the homecoming NRIs, and there was a big question about citizenship, who is an Indian and who is a foreigner, particularly in the context of the microbes that they were carrying. Like human beings are seen as the carriers of microbes. And then, of course, the relationship between the microbiome and various academic research, whether we have already started using or whether we can use, and whether it is right to use, and so. Now, if we start thinking then with microbes, I would rather implore all of you to think with microbes. There are a few questions that we can import in our study of various disciplines, including literature and culture. So these are the questions. Let's look at these questions. How has the microbiome changed the meaning of citizenship? Has it changed the citizenship or not? How has it? As I've already pointed out, we've had many cases and instances of this being debated. Then, how do ongoing social practices absorb and shape unfolding knowledge of microbiome? Whether these social practices are helpful in understanding, or whether they impede our understanding of microbiome. Then comes the third one. How might scientific findings relating to the role of microbiome in human health and even psychological well-being impact on understanding of the individual? Do we understand an individual? And this very idea that individual is indivisible goes for a toss. That individual, like I'll come to that anyway. It's also a title of a very famous book, I Contain Multitudes. Of course, it's very Whitmanesque, but then that has become a title of a book, and I'll be talking about that also. So how microbiomes shape our health and even our psychological well-being, including our behavior. So we could revisit all human behavioral episodes in the context of biomes, microbiomes and microbes. Then, what are the political and ecological drivers of microbial dysbiosis? Now, what is this dysbiosis? This is also called dysbacteriosis. Dysbacteriosis is a microbial imbalance on or inside of one of the colonies of bacteria. There are hundreds of them. If one of the colonies of bacteria can create balance in so many things in our day-to-day life, including our political and ecological drivers of microbial dysbiosis. Like, for example, exile, migration, and so many other factors can also contribute to this. So that these are the political and ecological drivers. Then, what social science and humanity tools both conceptual and methodological. We are currently involved in chiseling out some of them. We are trying to sculpt some of these tools and methods, both conceptual and methodological, can be harnessed to facilitate interdisciplinary investigation of the microbial connections between humans, animals, and environment. I would rather say that the very idea, the label of animal, should be extended to all organic beings. So that also is a very interesting question that we have to address. And then last one, how do, not necessarily the last, you can add to that, how do particular versions, imaginaries or narratives of microbiome gain credibility and circulate, and how some of these reports and some of these news reports and some of these images and some of these writings about microbiome get credibility and they get into circulation. So this is more about how microbes influence culture, inform culture, and how culture itself is embedded in a microbial situation. A number of questions can be raised, and here I come to this very significant work that I was talking about, of a very interesting and a very fascinating philosopher and a journalist. This is a book-long work. I contain multitudes, and all echoes are necessarily embedded. There is a you can hear the echo of Whitman, Song of Myself. I think it is a section 51 of that Song of Myself, from Whitman to the song of the lyrics of Bob Dylan of the same title, I Contain Multitudes. In both the cases, they don't necessarily talk about the microbes. They talk about the people and community and things that they are able to internalize. So Ed Yong is a Malaysian-born British science journalist. So this brings me to this point of interest that I was talking about, science writing. It's become very popular, what is called the long form journalism, science writing, combining journalism and scientific temperament. And this is an example of that. I Contain Multitudes is a wonderful sample of long form journalism and science writing. And he also runs a blog of the title, very interesting title, Not Exactly Rocket Science. That's the name of his blog. And very, very complex, but a very interesting thinker. And what Ed Yong tells here is that microbes certainly subvert our notions of individuality. That when I'm speaking, it is not just me speaking, but also the microbial condition within me. And I will not be speaking if there is a microbial imbalance. So the very idea of individuality is very often subverted by the presence and action agency of microbes. He also points out that of 11 mammalian organ systems, all mammals have these organ systems, 10 have persistent association with microorganisms. A lot of our organs are shaped, controlled, conditioned by microorganisms. And if 10 of my 11 organs are controlled by microbes or influenced by microbes, so I need to say that my individuality is also largely shaped by them. And he admits then at the end of a very interesting argument, very, very valid argument, dense argument, he comes to this point that we are at loss for a definition of biological individuality. We may talk about social individuality, but then biological individuality is a very difficult point to define. And that is largely because of the continuous possibility of this animal microbe symbiosis, unending process of that. I will not get into the other animals and the complex relation of other animals and microbes for the want of time. And two of his statements I found very interesting are these. One, he asks a question. There are two interesting questions, not statements. Is it me wanting to turn this book's pages, or is it my microbiota instructing me to do so? So when do we pick up a book? The mood for reading, according to him, even including his book, reading his book is very often decided by the microbes. Then one more thing, one more very interesting question: am I eating what I want, or what they want me to eat? Who are they? The microbes. So do we eat, or are we urged to eat? Like even our food preference, culinary preferences, according to Ed Yong, uh, are conditioned by the microbes. And in his apart, he has been very active recently. I've been following him in his blogs. Um, there are two more very interesting statements that I can quote here. One, he says that as pandemics get wider, they feel weirder. Here, maybe the government, the people in power, as the pandemics get wider, they feel weirder. He also wrote a very dense article on 20th April 2020 of the title, Why the Coronavirus is So Confusing. This is the confusion that I was reflecting at the beginning. The confusion is about even to there are many levels, many trajectories of confusion that he talks about. One is identifying the virus. Two, naming the virus. Three, vaccine, research in the direction of vaccine, the governmental policies on that, and so on. So he says that these microbes have put us in complete confusion, and the coronavirus is also a very confusing situation. Yeah. Then moving ahead, while talking about this microbial presence of culture, culture and microbes have been very closely associated. Let's take, for example, one single aspect. There are many aspects. One of them is the culinary culture. It's about food. Food is a part of culture. We all agree. Like so many things, language can define culture. Food also can determine the culture. And there is a culinary iconography. We have nationhood. We have community identities, which are very often tagged with culinary culture. And take one small part of that, this art of fermenting, which is there in almost all communities. We call it, maybe humorously, we could call them as sour microbes. Those sour microbes, when they are in action, we get many culinary delights fermented. So particularly the wine making or the beer making in various countries. See, what they are seen to do, or proved to have done, is the presence of the microbes in fermentation. And we know that neither cheese or not nor even wine will be possible without microbes. So the presence of increased micronutrient content, and they also enhance food textures and tastes. And these textures and tastes are like the colors and the fabric of national flags. And these food specialities can be identified with various nations. For example, the very brew art, wine making, beer making, has been a part of national iconography. For example, there is this local drink in Lebanon and Middle East called Iraq. And champagne is so much a national drink, again, largely with the help of microbes, identified with France. Whereas Hama in Syria, we also have those images of Hama sellers on the street with a Hama kettle. Then we have this Ikigaj of Rwanda, Jaban of Morocco, and this Kashiri of Brazil. All of them have been now identified as the national drinks. And we come to this point that this whole national culinary iconography is also dependent on largely on microbes. Then artists have also been inspired by this relationship between what is fed and what is experimented. And one of the paintings that we can talk about is this autumn autolysis. Autolysis is a very, very significant term in biology, microbiology particularly. Autolysis is a situation where the cells start consuming their own protein, or the protein of nearby cells, a kind of microbial cannibalism, wherein these bacteria and some of these microbes are grown in media are those solutions with protein. But then once there is a nutrient depletion, then the color changes, and then the patterns also change. And if the growth medium doesn't have sufficient nutrients supply, then the patterns also change. And Dali had a chance to look at that and to make a painting, a design of the title Autumn Autolysis. From that, I move on to another interesting domain that I have been talking about, and then I've reflected in a couple of other places as well, is the concept of eco-art. And what is that? It is about art, humanity, and nature, as exemplified in the biosphere reserves and the multiple ecosystems. So this complex connectivity of these three aspects, humanity, art and nature,